You have felt it before. That thing inside you that will not sleep. That will not quiet down no matter how many times you reason with it, distract yourself from it, or bury it under the noise of other people's opinions. It does not ask for your permission. It does not respect your schedule. It lives in the marrow of you, and some nights when everything else goes silent, it is the only voice left. And you have spent years, trying to make it stop. Not because it is weak, but because the world told you that wanting something with that kind of ferocity was dangerous, unstable, selfish. They handed you a word for it, obsession, and they said it like a warning. You believed them. You tried to balance it, moderate it, manage it like a budget or a diet. You smiled when they called you intense, as if intensity were a flaw to be corrected rather than a weapon to be forged. And every single time you dimmed that fire, something inside you went quiet in a way that felt like dying. That ends here. The lie exposed. Here is the lie you have been living inside. Obsession is a pathology. That is what the modern world decided. The therapists measured it. The productivity gurus warned against it. The people who loved you worried about it. And so you internalized the verdict that the burning thing inside you was something to be healed, not honored. That is the lie. Niccolo Machiavelli, the Florentine philosopher who watched empires rise and collapse from the inside, understood something that 500 years of comfortable thinking has tried to erase. He studied men of absolute power, men who built things that lasted centuries, and what he found was not that they were balanced. What he found was that they were singular. Not distracted, not diversified, singular. Machiavelli wrote in The Prince that the greatest leaders he observed shared one quality above all others. They had made a total commitment. Not a partial one, not a conditional one. A commitment so complete that it reorganized everything around it. The modern world calls that obsession. The ancient world called it virtue, from the Latin virtus, meaning strength, force, the fullness of a man's power directed at a single aim. This is not a disorder. This is what you were built for. Section I, The Prince's Doctrine. Why half-commitment is the real disease. Marcus Aurelius ruled the Roman Empire at its peak, commanding armies, managing corruption, navigating plague and war, and he did it while writing philosophy in private journals he never intended to publish. The meditations were not a public performance. They were a man sharpening himself in the dark. He wrote, "Confine yourself to the present. Not yesterday's regret, not tomorrow's anxiety. The present, this act, this moment, this singular point of contact between intention and reality." That is Stoic obsession, not frantic, not desperate, concentrated. The Stoics had a name for the man who divided his attention across 10 desires. They called him the scatterbrained man, the one who wanted everything and therefore built nothing. Seneca wrote to his friend Lucilius, "To be everywhere is to be nowhere." Read that again. To be everywhere is to be nowhere. You know this man? You may be this man, pulled in every direction by every possibility, every fear, every obligation, unable to drive a single stake deep into the earth because you are constantly repositioning. That is not freedom. That is fragmentation wearing the mask of options. Machiavelli watched rulers lose kingdoms not through lack of intelligence, but through lack of resolve. The man who commits halfway invites fortune to finish the job for him, and fortune, as Machiavelli wrote, is arbiter of half our actions. The other half belongs to you. But only if you choose. Half commitment does not have your risk, it doubles your failure. The man who cannot obsess cannot build anything worth having. Section II, The Stoic Furnace. Turning pain into precision. Epictetus was born a slave. Epictetus was born a slave. Not metaphorically. Literally, owned, controlled, his body not his own. And from inside that condition, he developed the most ruthless philosophy of personal power that the ancient world produced. He said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." But here is what people miss when they quote that line. Epictetus was not talking about positive thinking. He was talking about the forge. The Stoics understood that suffering, real suffering, not the comfortable kind, was not an obstacle to the philosophical life. It was the material of it. You do not develop obsession by avoiding pain. You develop it by running your pain through the furnace until it becomes something sharp. Every great obsession in history was born inside a wound. Napoleon Bonaparte, humiliated as a child for his Corsican accent, mocked by his French classmates, told he was not one of them, turned that wound into a military obsession so precise that he rewrote the map of Europe, not in spite of the humiliation, through it. Marcus Aurelius lost children, faced betrayal, governed through plague, and every time the furnace got hotter, the philosophy in those private journals got sharper, more precise, more ruthlessly honest. Your pain is not a detour from your obsession. Your pain is the raw material of it. Ask yourself this: what is the wound underneath your drive? Not the surface goal. The wound, the thing that happened or did not happen that made you need to prove something to yourself, to someone who is no longer watching, to a version of the world that told you what you were not. That wound, faced directly, becomes fuel that never runs out. The Stoic Furnace does not destroy the man. It removes everything that is not him. Section III, the Hermetic Convergence. The ancient secret of directed will. The Hermetic tradition, rooted in writings attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, the ancient sage who bridged Greek and Egyptian wisdom, taught a principle that modern neuroscience is only now beginning to map in laboratory language. The principle is this: directed will alters reality. Not metaphorically, structurally. The Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, as within, so without, was not poetry. It was a description of how concentrated inner force manifests in the outer world. When a man's internal landscape is unified, when his desire, his attention, and his identity are all pointing at the same thing, the external world begins to reorganize around that convergence point. Modern neuroscience calls this the reticular activating system, the filter in your brainstem that decides what information reaches your conscious mind. When you commit to something with absolute psychological weight, this system begins to show you only what serves the mission. Doors you walked past for years suddenly appear visible. People who share your trajectory seem to surface from nowhere. The ancient world did not have the language of neuroscience, but they described the same mechanism. Lao Tzu wrote in the Tao Te Ching, "He who knows others is wise, he who knows himself is enlightened." The man who knows himself, truly knows what he is obsessed with, at the bone level, becomes a force that does not need to chase. He becomes a convergence point. This is not mysticism for its own sake. This is the architecture of obsession at its deepest level. Your obsession is not just psychological. It is energetic. It is the full weight of who you are, thrown in a single direction, generating a force that bends circumstances toward you rather than requiring you to chase them. The man who is fully convergent does not hunt, he attracts. Section IV, the shadow contract. What you agreed to without knowing. Carl Jung spent his life mapping what he called the shadow, the buried parts of the self that the ego refuses to acknowledge, because the social world made them unacceptable. Your obsession lives there, not because it is evil, but because somewhere, in a family, a school, a relationship, you received the message that wanting too much was dangerous, that your intensity made people uncomfortable, that your hunger was arrogance. And so you made a contract. Jung called unconscious agreements like this complexes, automated emotional patterns that run beneath the surface of conscious choice, directing behavior without permission. You agreed to stay below a certain threshold, to perform moderation you did not feel, to explain your ambitions apologetically, making them smaller in the telling so the people around you stayed comfortable. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That contract is your fate right now. Every time you pull back from full commitment, every time you minimize your vision in conversation, every time you use the word realistic as a synonym for safe, you are honoring an agreement you never consciously signed. Find the moment, you know what it is, the age, the room, the voice that first told you that what you wanted was too much. That voice was not truth. That voice was someone else's fear, handed to you at an age when you could not yet refuse it. The work here is not to be angry at that voice. The work is to recognize that you have been living by its rules, and to choose, deliberately, consciously, to void the contract. The shadow does not destroy the man who faces it, it becomes him. Find the moment, you know what it is, the age, the room, the voice that first told you that what you wanted was too much. That voice was not truth. That voice was someone else's fear, handed to you at an age when you could not yet refuse it. The work here is not to be angry at that voice. The work is to recognize that you have been living by its rules, and to choose, deliberately, consciously, to void the contract. The shadow does not destroy the man who faces it, it becomes him. Section V, the identity forge. You are not trying to change what you do. This is the section most men skip. They adjust their habits. They restructure their mornings. They download the apps, build the systems, read the books, join the programs. And 6 months later, nothing fundamental has shifted because they changed their behavior while leaving their identity completely untouched. You are not trying to change what you do. You are deciding who you are. The samurai tradition had a concept called Bushido, the way of the warrior, which was not primarily a code of conduct. It was a code of being. The samurai did not wake up each morning and decide to act with honor. He had already resolved the question of identity. The sword was not a tool he picked up. It was an extension of what he had already irrevocably become. Epictetus, born a slave, died one of the most powerful philosophical minds in Roman history, taught that the only true freedom was the ownership of your own nature, not freedom from circumstances, freedom through absolute clarity about who you are. You are not a distracted man trying to be focused. You are not a fearful man trying to be brave. You are not a scattered man trying to build something. You are a man who has chosen his obsession. You are a man who has looked into the Machiavellian truth, that half-commitment is the real disease, and refused it. You are a man who has walked through the Stoic Furnace and let it burn away everything that is not essential. That is not a behavior, that is an identity. Say it to yourself, not as affirmation, but as a statement of fact, as cold and clear as a blade. This is who I am. This is what I am for. Everything else is secondary. When your identity shifts at that level, your behavior follows automatically. You do not need discipline to do what you fundamentally are. You are not becoming obsessed. You are finally admitting that you already were. Closing. The man on the other side. Picture him. He does not look frantic. He does not wear his ambition on the surface the way hungry men do, loudly, desperately, needing to be seen. He looks settled. There is something behind his eyes that does not need external validation because it is validated every morning in private, in the hours before the world is watching, in the work that no one sees but everyone eventually feels. He moves deliberately, like every step has already been decided at a level deeper than thought. He does not explain himself, not because he is arrogant, but because a man who knows exactly what he is and what he is building does not require the approval of people who do not understand the architecture. People feel it when they are around him. They cannot name what it is. They call it confidence or presence or charisma, but it is none of those things. It is convergence. He is a man whose inner world and outer actions are pointing at exactly the same thing. No contradiction, no apology, no negotiation. That man is not a fantasy. He is you after you stop managing the fire and let it build into something that cannot be ignored. Be memento mori. But hear this clearly. That man does not have unlimited time to arrive. The Stoics carried death with them everywhere, not as morbidity but as mathematics. Marcus Aurelius wrote in the Meditations, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. Not tomorrow. Now." Seneca wrote to Lucilius, "Omnia aliena sunt tempus tantum nostrum est." Everything else belongs to others. Time alone is ours. Every day you spend managing your obsession instead of becoming it is a day that cannot be returned. The window is not infinite. The fire you feel right now, that ember that has been burning in the back of your skull through every season of your life, does not burn forever if you keep smothering it with reasonableness, with other people's comfort, with the contract you never consciously signed. The ancient Stoics did not fear death. They feared the unlived life. They feared arriving at the end of their days and discovering that they had spent their one irreplaceable existence being manageable. That is the real horror. Not failure, not pain, not obsession. The horror is dying moderate. What you heard today is the public layer. The deeper work, the specific practices, the psychological methods that cannot be shared openly, the full architecture of what it means to weaponize obsession at the identity level, that lives behind the join button. The men in that space are not here for surface content. They did not come for comfort. They came for the real work. Most people who watched this will feel it for an hour. They will sit with it. They will tell themselves something shifted. And by nightfall, they will have returned to the contract. Most won't join. Most won't do the work. Most will call it intense and move to something easier. That is the point. If something in this landed like a key turning in a lock, if you recognized yourself somewhere in what was said today, then you already know which side of that line you are on. Subscribe, the next one goes deeper.